All right. Well, welcome to another show of. I got that. I'm a little sick, so I got that little. Not sick, but just a little bit under the weather. So I got that under the weather voice. I like it. I think it's cool.
I think you just wanted to do that.
I did. But we're starting another episode, Criminal Law Show. We got Sean McDonald. Sean, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Sean McDonald of Smith, McDonald, Boland, criminal trial lawyers here in the greater Houston area. If you don't know, now you know. So, and then, of course, we got Johnny with us, Jay Wise. Jay Wiseman. What's up, man?
How you doing?
Man, I'm great. This is something that this has been one of those little touchy, sensitive conversations that you want to have. But I think it's important that you have, because I feel like it seems like at least you have more and more of these kinds of things coming up nowadays in relation to basically having, sexual assault, sexual harassment, sex crimes, just in general. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people, I know that scares a lot of people when you start saying those kinds of words. It scares me. I mean, I've got 2 daughters.
Yeah,
Johnny has a daughter.
I have a daughter. Yeah, absolutely.
And when you start talking about this, you start getting, I think like you had mentioned, you get a little nervous, a little anxious, and you just want to kind of know some stats. And that's really kind of the purpose of this conversation, is just so you can talk a little bit about your experiences, what you've seen, just some things to look out for parents out there. I mean, because it's like I said, it's a scary deal.
It is.
It's a scary situation. First thing, I'll start off by just asking in general, what kind of your case file do you have in relation to just sexual deviancy crimes in general?
It's probably about 15% of our practice, maybe 10% of our practice.
Okay.
You can't carry very many or handle very many at any given time because they're so time consuming and in depth and stressful. And
I can imagine.
It's difficult. I mean, just in all honesty, those are hard cases for both sides. And, a lot of people frown upon attorneys representing individuals who've been accused. And it's hard on us sometimes. And ultimately, we've, as a firm, have decided that we just want to make sure that our client is treated fairly and that we investigate it to ensure that the accusations are accurate and true.
And I guess that would be my question, is when you've had people that look at you in a certain way when you're representing someone like that, or ask questions about what's generally, I guess, is that your response, what you just said?
For me personally, I can't really speak for Amanda or Phoebe, but for me personally, I'm a firm believer in our Constitution. Mm-hmm. I believe they have a right to a fair trial. Mm-hmm. And that's all I'm there to do. The vast majority, 98, maybe even 99% of these cases, plea out. They work out. Mm-hmm. So it's never a situation where we're in court cross-examining the complaining witness, being aggressive, making her or him feel uncomfortable. Those situations are few and far between. For the most part, we do our investigation. We read the offense report. We interview witnesses. We have our investigator interview witnesses. We roundtable it, and then we come up with a recommendation to our client. And the recommendation, our client can accept it, or they can choose to ignore our advice and go a different route. But again, the vast majority of times, the conversations we're having with our clients is, look, man, this isn't a case that you can win at trial. You need to strongly consider trying to work this case out. We've investigated it. We have no information to lead us to believe that this child was coerced, is not telling the truth. We can't find any motives for this child to make up a story like this. The child looked credible on the video. The child maintained her story throughout and has told the same story throughout. I mean, we go through steps just in our internal investigation to feel comfortable that this in fact is an accurate and fair situation.
Right.
And then we, in our professional opinion, we give that to our client. And the vast majority of times it's, look, kids have made up stories of being sexually assaulted. There's no question about it. I'm not sure I've had a single one that I could definitively prove that the child was lying. Mm. And I've handled, as a prosecutor, I handled hundreds. As a defense attorney, I've handled, 50 to 100.
Yeah.
there may be situations the state can't prove it.
So you fought on both sides of that fence.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was a prosecutor, I tried more sex crimes than I did anything.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just that, those are the cases that get tried as a prosecutor a lot of times, because it's always one person's word against another.
Yeah.
And so those cases get tried quite often. And the stakes are so high, so a lot of times the offers are really, really high. I mean, you have 30, 40, 50-year offers, and it's very hard to convince a client to take that type of offer. And then a lot of times, if you're a first-time offender, you'll get a probation offer because you have a 7-year-old child, and is it better for that 7-year-old child to move on and continue with therapy or go through the process of a trial? When you still can have a defendant who's placed on probation, who will be polygraphed, can't be around children, registered sex offender, that there's parameters in place to attempt to ensure that that person will not reoffend, but still keeping in mind the complainant and forcing her to go through a trial, which is extremely difficult for everybody.
Right.
Yeah. Well, one thing you mentioned was the sexual offender registry.
Yes.
And, part of this is a touchy subject for everybody. And the reason why I wanted to do it or agree to do it was also to be proactive for parents, to be preventative, to give parents as well as children or young adults signs or clues or different things so that everybody can just be more observant and it's not so taboo or people are scared to talk about it. I think that the more that we can talk about it and put it out there and make people aware, the better everybody's going to be as far as protecting themselves. How is the registry, how can people use that to benefit them? What exactly is it? And because I believe it's public knowledge.
It is.
Where you can search anything. Tell us a little bit more about what that is.
Okay, so there's two types of registration in Texas. There's a 10-year registration. So it's for indecency by exposure. Say you expose yourself to a child. If you're placed on probation for a third-degree felony, indecency by exposure, then you must register for 10 years post-release from probation. So if you get 5 years probation, you have to register starting after that 5-year probation is completed. So it'll be a 15-year registration. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You have to register with the city and or county that you live in. If you live in the city limits, you register with the city. If you live outside the city limits, you register with the county. And that registration is typically yearly, and you just have to remain at the same job or the same household. And if you switch, you must notify them before you switch and after you switch. Then there's the lifetime registration, which is the more serious crimes, the touching of children, the penetration, things like that. Then it's a lifetime registration, same type of city, municipality, or county, and same yearly, unless you're a high risk, and then it's more often than that. And you can get on, if you'll just Google Texas Sex Offender Registry, it's through the Texas Department of Public Safety, and you can pull your zip code. You can do a search with your zip code, with your neighborhood, and you just type in your zip code, search for sex offenders, and it will bring up a list of, whatever this zip code is, 25 registered sex offenders. And it'll tell you what they were convicted of. They'll show you a picture of them, what their name is, where their address is. So, I do that every 3 months in my neighborhood. I just pull up the zip code, do a search to see, and you will be shocked how many sex offenders live in your zip code.
Wow.
I think when I checked, there were 18 to 25 in Riverstone, which is a really nice neighborhood. And you're just in your zip code, and it's shocking.
Yeah.
So proactive-wise, that's the first thing I would do as a parent is just do a search. Find out who's around you, who's in the neighborhood, who's down the street, so you can take precautions to protect your kids, because somebody has to. And it's on the parents.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the first step. And that's something that I'm very diligent with.
Well, and it's we were talking about it earlier, is, who are you going to allow your child or children to, have sleepovers, or whose house can they go to or stay
right.
at? It's like, go check that registry before letting your kid go anywhere. And it'll give you some good insight.
Absolutely. And,
And even if it's not the person they're going to, it might be a neighbor directly next door. It's something to be cautious about.
Yeah, you just never know. If your child's having a sleepover, put that address in the database to see how many offenders within 2 square miles of that house are a registered sex offender. If there's one next door across the street, my kid's not staying there.
How often are those updated? website? Do you know?
I would think weekly,
Okay.
maybe even daily. I mean, I
Okay.
think they're on top of it
Okay.
just because it's such a big deal.
Oh yeah.
And it's the funny thing is certain municipalities and counties or cities won't do sex offender checks. So, like, say the Sugar Land, they have 17 registered sex offenders. They'll have somebody who will go around and check, knock on the door. Is this person living here? How long have they lived here? Are they still living here? Can you show me proof they're living here? Can I speak to this person? They'll do checks. If a city or a county is not doing checks and not staying on top of it, it goes viral to all the local sex offenders, and they'll move to that municipality because they know they're not doing checks and they won't get caught.
Wow.
Which was pretty shocking to me. I didn't know. I guess there's some websites or back pages that they go on and they tell each other, hey, Brazoria County is not doing checks anymore like they used to. They fired the person, or, they downsized and couldn't afford it. They're not doing checks anymore. If you want to move out here, you won't get caught.
Wow. Because
it's very difficult if somebody says, I'm moving out of Sugar Land. Sugar Land's done. They're saying, I'm moving to Angleton. Well, it's on that sex offender to register in Angleton. If they don't register in Angleton, well, then you got a problem. Tracking them then becomes an issue.
I see. Because nobody's coming by to check on them, make
That's
sure
right.
they're there. And so if they were to come by on a regular basis, which they should, they realize, oh, this person's not here. We need to go figure out where they're at.
Yeah, they'll put an address in Angleton. No one's ever going to check. They go live somewhere else.
How would they find that out? So if they come up to a house and they find out this person's not here, doesn't look like they've been there for, let's say, a week or two, what do they do at that point?
They open a criminal investigation, and then they charge them for failing to register as a sex offender, which is a felony.
And so that's a warrant issued at that point?
They'll issue a warrant for their arrest.
Okay.
And it happens, it's quite often it happens.
Yeah. I don't even think about that. As far as like people checking on them on a regular basis, and if they don't. Because, yeah, you learn these kinds of things all the time, often about this community of people that do this. It's a it literally is a community of people that communicate underground, communicate in ways that you would not. They're not going to be out there on blogs or websites openly communicating, saying, "Hey, for the group out," like they just know what that is, right? There's a lot of that underground communication.
A lot more than we are willing to, frankly, accept and consider. It's difficult.
So I guess that would be a good segue to go to the next part, which would be, as a parent or someone that is a guardian or anything like that, what are some of the things to look for? What are some of the signs to see a child that is, because, we have a lot of kids nowadays that are online, gaming, YouTube, whatever. What do you know of some things that parents should look for, some of those communications that may be a little underground?
I think first and foremost, it's just trust your gut.
Mm-hmm.
If something doesn't feel right with somebody that's close to your child, it's probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, if they're communicating on social media with an adult, then there's a problem. Like, as an adult, I should never, ever be communicating with a child via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. My daughter's friends never should be having those conversations on social media.
Right.
If those conversations are taking place, it's via text message that can be verified what was said and wasn't said, not like Snapchat.
Right.
And don't ever let your child be alone with anybody you're not, essentially wouldn't trust your life with. That's hard for parents because they don't want to be that type of person that they're just not trusting. But that's the reality of it. And the line of work I do is, my daughter is going to be hard pressed to get my permission to have a sleepover at someone's home. She has wonderful friends and their parents are wonderful, but at the end of the day, I don't really know them. I don't really know their neighbors. I don't know the 16-year-old teenage kid that lives next door, that they're going to go to the pool and swim, or they're going to play outside with, in a cul-de-sac, and the adults aren't really watching because it's a cul-de-sac. I don't know all of that. And it just makes me uncomfortable. And, in the end, maybe it's not fair to my daughter. And maybe that's, she's not going to get those opportunities. But in the end, it's more important to protect her from those situations than it is to have to fight through the ramifications of something unfortunately happening like that.
So what are you seeing technology-wise that people, I know you kind of briefly mentioned it, but what kind of technology are you seeing people are using to reach out to kids?
Gaming platforms, a little bit. but that's mostly male dominated. So you don't see a whole lot, but Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, that's the main ways, especially Snapchat, because people under the perception of once you put it on there and the person reads it, it disappears.
Yeah.
In a way it does, but law enforcement can always get that information.
Okay.
It's still on your phone, number one. And number two, if they push Snapchat hard enough, Snapchat will release the contents of those messages.
That's good to know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
that's really good to know.
I don't necessarily want sex offenders to know that, because I want them to fall into this. I think I can get away with it, and they in fact can't. They get caught. But that's the reality of it. And it's, kids are online and on social media so much. I mean, it's consuming their lives and ours too. I mean, we're on our phones all the time. And it's just an easy and convenient way to bypass their parents and have conversations with kids over and over again and groom them. I mean, it's just so easy to do that, and kids don't think anything about it because they're communicating online through social media all the time, every day. And so when a teacher does that, or their dad's friend does that, or some older high school student in your middle school does that, it's not that alarming. You don't know. Kids are just naive to those things.
Right. What do you, we talk, I know we keep using the term girl because we have girls and all that. I'm curious to know what you see on the stats of boys and girls that are going through, because I mean it's happening just as much to boys as it is to girls. Do you know what those? Because we're like I said, we're parents of daughters, and I feel like whenever you're a parent of a boy, you tend to think I don't have to worry about that because I got a boy and nobody. But it seems like it's happening more and more.
It does, and you see a lot. You see a lot more with teachers. I don't necessarily see you've seen more with teachers and boys, but you've seen more media attention with teachers having inappropriate relationships with high school boys. I don't necessarily believe it's more prevalent than it used to be. It's just getting more media attention.
Okay. And
then we don't see a whole lot of boy victims. It happens, but I don't want to say vast majority, but I would say the majority are girls. And it's a little different grooming process for girls, because girls, you'd never let your daughter go with a man out of town or go out to eat with some man, or the man be her mentor. You see that with a lot of young boys, is you'll have a guy come into the family's life, and a lot of times the family is poor, don't have a lot, and someone will come in and offer them, hey, I'll take the boy to the Astros game, or something that your family can't provide him. I'll come provide him that. I'll take him to the Astros game. I'll be a mentor. I'll help him through school. So you see this mentoring process that little boys, men will do to little boys. It's a little different than what we see with the girls. For the most part, boys aren't really communicating like that as much on social media. Girls are just more sensitive. They're more caring. It's more of a feeling situation for them. We don't see a whole lot of the males other than the teachers. We see quite a bit of that, but other than that, we don't.
Okay, all right.
I guess kind of a alert word when you hear sex trafficking. Again, it's scary to talk about. It's scary to hear it. I don't like hearing that. I mean, the first thing you do is you think about your kids, and if you see anything on TV or hear about raids or anything, it's shocking. It's scary as shit.
It is.
And so, I wanted to know what you're seeing from your lens when it comes to sex trafficking, or if we see a raid, a sex trafficking. I think there was something a couple weeks ago, a big one, where there was 500 people that got arrested or something. And it's like, what does that really mean? What are these people doing? Is it cartels coming over and kidnapping kids and throwing them in vans, and that's what we're needing to worry about? Or is it, 8th graders luring 6th graders? Or is it, is it these massage parlors around town that are luring 17-year-olds in there so they're a little bit underage, and that's, what these big raids are? I think it's just so undercover, nobody really knows. And I think that if we can expose some of that, or or educate, it would bring more insight and help everybody out. So I'm curious to know, when you hear sex trafficking, what are you seeing happen out on the streets of Houston?
So it's kind of twofold. I think the scariest for us, just as parents, is having a older young man, 18, 19, 20, starting to date a 15, 16-year-old. They get in a relationship, and then he convinces that girl, like, hey, we can make a lot of money if you're open to having sex with other guys, me and you can get paid. We'll make a lot of money. I'll set it up. I'll protect you. You have sex with these guys, and we'll split the profits, or I'll give you 25%. So that you're seeing a lot of that, just convincing the girls it's a good thing to do. We can make a lot of money, and it's somebody that they're typically in a relationship. Not typically. A lot of times they're in a relationship with, or they groom them and make them feel like they're in a relationship, and then they essentially pimp them out. Because the market for 15 to 18, 19-year-old girls is astronomical with those type of people. And then you get the other type of sex trafficking where you get a lot of individuals coming from Asia, China, Europe, who are brought over here, and then they're forced to work in a massage parlor, essentially as repaying their cost to come to America and someone to sponsor them on a work visa. They'll then put them in a massage parlor and make them work, have sex with individuals in the massage parlor. Law enforcement will go in there, they'll shut the facility down, they'll arrest everybody. The individual bonds out, and then she is immediately sent to another massage parlor. And so law enforcement has to, it's like that whack-a-mole. You hit one and 5 pop up. And the girls just switch between them. So when you arrest the girls, they bond out because it's a prostitution. It's $100 fine or $100 bond. They get out, they go to another massage parlor that the madam owns, or this individual, this family, or this man owns, and she'll just bounce around to these different massage parlors. One gets shut down, they'll send them to another one, and you never can get on top of it. So law enforcement is consistently shutting down these massage parlors who are involved in this sex trafficking. They're trafficking these women, but you just can't. It's very difficult to stay on top of it.
Gotcha.
So when you see the sex trafficking, a lot of it is sex trafficking these young girls that they've groomed out of high school, or pulling away from strip clubs that aren't necessarily kidnapped. They've kind of agreed, okay, look, I'll go to Florida with you. So they didn't kidnap them. They kind of willingly go into Florida, but they're being trafficked, and the girls just don't understand the ramifications of what's really going to happen. And they get to Florida, and now what are you going to do? The child has no money. The only person she knows is the guy that took her that says, I love you. Right. And we don't have any money. How's she going to get home? Don't give her access to phones. So she gets in a situation that she doesn't have a lot of free will and then make decisions to get out of that situation. So a lot of times they take them to a different part of the country because they know how difficult it is for them to get home.
Is this sex trafficking through massage parlors and all these different things? Is this something that have the numbers of these cases risen? Has it always been like this, and now it's just with media and just the way the stories come out, or like it just seems like all this stuff, like what you were talking about earlier with the teachers and this kind of thing. Is the sex trafficking on the rise?
I don't know. Short answer is I don't know. For a couple of reasons. Law enforcement, number one, is putting more resources towards it than they used to, clearly. So you're going to automatically see a rise in the number of arrests. But does that mean necessarily that it's happening more often than it did 10 years ago? No, because they weren't enforcing it 10 years ago like they are now, and the resources they put towards it. And then the media attention plays a big part. You only know what media tells you. If media doesn't report it, it doesn't mean it's not happening. If media reports it, doesn't mean it's happening more often than it did 10 years ago. But now you hear a lot about it, so people are interested. You hear human trafficking, you hear it on the TV, you perk up and you watch.
For sure.
Not like that 8 or 10 years ago. You hear human trafficking, people are just discounting it, so media didn't run with it.
Right.
They run with what gets people's attention and gets clicks.
Right.
And right now it's human trafficking.
Yeah.
You see a lot with, like we talked about, with the female teachers having sex with the male students. That's starting to pique people's interest, so there's a lot more stories they run on it. They give it airtime that they didn't used to give. So I don't know. We don't see a whole lot of trafficking. It happens, especially in Fort Bend County, it happens, but it's rare. Harris County is much more prevalent with the massage parlors and the grooming situations. It's just much more prevalent in Harris
How
County.
much are you seeing of, young girls or boys getting snatched up, getting kidnapped, and that type of stuff going on?
We don't see a lot of that because a lot of them that, if you're kidnapping a child, you're not bringing them to Sugar Land. You're taking them to Harris County, you're taking them to Houston, you're taking them to Dallas, you're taking them to San Antonio, these bigger metropolis, because there's just so much more money involved in clientele. We don't see a whole lot of the kidnapping. It happens, but we just don't see a whole lot of it.
Okay.
That's kind of the image you have. Mm-hmm. At least I do, when it comes to that, where you're talking about like the kidnapping for sex trafficking. Yeah. Like I have this image of
as soon as I hear sex trafficking,
dudes scooped up and, out of nowhere, picked them up and put them in a van, and then, they're gone, mm-hmm. And that's the kind of thing that you have.
Oh, it's scary.
Have in your mind. And I haven't thought about that aspect of it. Just people that they know, that they become friends with, that kind of sell them on this idea of, hey, let's make a buck. And the next thing you know.
And you'll see parents do it with their children as well.
Yeah.
The parents will
wow.
Prostitute their kids out. Say, you make a lot of money, frankly. And that's unfortunate. But they'll get desperate enough that they'll prostitute their kids out and they can make quite a bit of money. You come sleep with my 16-year-old, give me $300. And it's, it's unfortunate, but it happens.
What's the type of penalty if a parent or anybody gets caught doing that?
It ranges anywhere from a second degree to a first degree felony. If there's a death involved, if it's a child, it can bump up the level of punishment. But it's a high level felony.
How much time is somebody looking at doing?
2 to 20 on a second and 5 to life on a first degree felony. So you can do hard time.
Let me ask you that. Why is that discrepancy so large? 5 to life. Like that just seems like a very broad,
I think ultimately the legislature wanted the jury to have the ability to consider the facts of each case.
Okay.
There may be say you have a 17-year-old kid who some guy beats up his girlfriend or his stepdad beats up his mom really bad, and he sees it for years and years. And, kid moves out of the house, but it just wears on him. So 5 years later, he comes back and shoots and kills stepdad. Mm. Is that the same set of facts on a murder as a 42-year-old man killing a 7-year-old child and stabbing the child to death, some stranger, and waiting on the subway?
I'm with you.
So the legislature trusted the juries enough to be able to distinguish what is the appropriate sentence. Okay. Some may deserve a 5 or 6 year sentence. Some may deserve a life in prison without parole sentence. So it gives the jury that ability. And typically murders, just your everyday murder, like you think of just a maybe even a gang shooting, you're looking anywhere from 30 to 65 years is typical range that you're going to get a jury to give somebody on a murder case.
Okay.
If it's an issue like we talked about with the stepdad, juries are going to come down quite a bit. But it also really, really helps the state reach agreements and plea cases out.
Okay.
Because it's very, very scary to go to trial on a first-degree felony. Even if you have good facts, what if you get a bad jury? They can life you. And so a lot of our clients don't want to roll the dice. They have to, it's a risk assessment. I may be able to beat the case. Their facts aren't very good, but if I don't beat the case, the jury can give you life in prison. They're offering you 12.
I'm with you.
So it really assists the state in pleading cases because if you capped it at say 25 years, it's 5 to 25. Someone's like, oh, the most I can get is 25. And they're offering me 15.
I'll try to fight it.
I'll try it. It's just an extra 5 years I have to do in prison.
Okay.
But if they're offering me 12 and I get life, that's an extra, 18 years in prison if they have to do 30 flat. So it really assists us in keeping dockets, or the state keeping dockets moving.
That makes sense.
Because that's a scary proposition.
That makes sense. When you have these sexual assault cases with kids, what typically are the parameters of the relationships that you see when these things are happening? Do you know what I mean by that? The parameters of father, stepfather, what is the, I guess to ask it more specifically, what is the family makeup of your typical sexual assault cases when it comes to children?
Stepdads, family members, cousins, stepbrothers, uncles, typical family relationship is, I would say, a large majority of it. Stepfathers that we see, and then, just the older cousin being around the 7-year-old girl, 14-year-old cousin all the time, or 18-year-old cousin, 17. We see a lot of juvenile crimes that way too, sex offenses. So it's mostly a family relationship, I would say, in my experience. I could be wrong, but that's a lot of what we see is some type of family relationship.
How much of that are you seeing in you might kind of think that that's, more impoverished neighborhoods, or, you might think, oh, that goes on in the trailer park, but not in my neighborhood. Do you see a difference as far as, whether it's tax brackets, income levels? Do you see it more in a specific tax bracket, or is it kind of really it's all over the place and it's somewhat equal, and it's happening just as much in your backyard? If you think you're in a nice big neighborhood, white picket fence, it's going on just as much as it is in the trailer parks.
I don't know if it's your socioeconomic status more than it's your parents being active in your life. So you can see it in both very prevalent neighborhoods where the family's really not involved in the child's life. They're following their career. They don't pay attention to the child. The nanny's raising the child, and they're not actively involved in their child's life. And then you have maybe lower end that are living in bad neighborhoods, or the family has to work 2 jobs to make ends meet, or there's some drug use involved. So it's not necessarily a socioeconomic issue. I think it's a supervision issue that we see throughout. I've had clients who are, make easily in the 6 figures, being charged, and then we have, some people who can't afford an attorney at all, and we get appointed to represent them. So you see kind of the gamut. Not as many high end, I would say, but it still exists.
Okay.
And that's what I've seen, is that it's or at least what I've heard, is that it's a lot more familiar situations than it is stranger situations, as far as these kind of child sexual assault situations. It's a lot more familial than stranger, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the misconception people have with, I'm going to protect my child, and they watch them really closely when they're in Walmart. Like, no one's ever going to take my child and touch my child in Walmart. I'm going to keep a good eye on them. I'm a great parent. I'm like, you don't have to worry about Walmart and some stranger touching your child. It happens. Be smart about it, but you need to take a close look on who your child's hanging out with every single day or every single weekend.
Right.
What uncles, what
I think
cousins.
That's a real good point.
Yeah, and that's, and people, that's hard to think that way because it's your family.
Right.
But that is a large portion of what I see is some family members that are doing something inappropriate with these kids and touching these kids.
I know you're not a counselor, but can you put out there some of the signs that some parents might want to look for?
What we talked about earlier, just go with your gut. If your child, if your child has a relationship with somebody that you wouldn't have with a child, something's probably not right. I know a lot of people want to think the best, and, oh, my child's really close to her Uncle Jimmy, and Uncle Jimmy gives her presents, and, if every time he sees her, he's bringing her candy. Every time he sees her, he's bringing her a present. He's, always volunteering to babysit, or they always go to store together, or she always wants to spend time with him and go places with him, and he wants to take her to the game, and it's just.
Well, and you just hit on something. You said that she always wants to go with him. It's you would think that if they were being sexually abused or molested, that they wouldn't want to go, or they would be scared, or they would cry. But you just said the exact opposite. So I think that is something that, you would want to look out for, because I guess they're being coerced into thinking that it's okay.
Yeah.
Or that it's something that they enjoy and it's fun.
And that's the whole grooming process. Your Uncle Jimmy doesn't take your daughter to the store for the first time they've seen Uncle Jimmy in a decade, and he doesn't touch your child. He takes your child to the store 25 times, and each time he's like, "Oh, so do you have a boyfriend? What'd you do this weekend? Have you kissed any boys before?" And this is a 6-month process until he feels like. These guys are smart. Because they're sex offenders, don't underestimate. These are horrific people, but they are smart and good at what they do. Chances are they've done it before. Chances are they're going to do it again if we don't catch them. They're very, very diligent and very, very patient with grooming and convincing your child that Jimmy really loves me. he talks to me about what I do the weekends, and I can tell him things I can't tell my parents. That's another sign. If your kid's telling somebody things about their life that your kids won't tell you, that needs to start raising red flags. Like, well, how are you having this conversation with my daughter and getting this information and I can't?
Right.
And so it's a process. And by the time they touch him, this kid feels loved, thinks Jimmy is doing the right thing. He's making me feel good. He's telling me the right things. He's looking out for me. And the child just, a friend of mine that worked sex crimes in the sheriff's office for a while, lives in Katy now. He ran for office about a year ago. He goes, as horrific as these cases are, he goes, the worst ones are when you see videos and someone's touching a 4 or 5-year-old, and the 4 or 5-year-old is giggling and smiling because the 4 and 5-year-old doesn't know exactly what this person is doing to him.
Right.
And he goes, it's so sickening watching this child be violated, and the child's laughing and smiling because they don't know any better.
Right.
And Uncle Jimmy's a nice guy. He makes me laugh. He's funny. He plays with me all the time and tickles me and wrestles with me. I mean, if your child's being tickled and wrestling with a family member or a neighbor a lot, it needs to raise red flags.
Yeah.
Like I'm not wrestling with my neighbor's daughter, and I'm not tickling my neighbor's daughter. I'm not taking my neighbor's daughter to a store by myself. Just don't do that. And if someone is doing that with your child, you need to step back, because it's easy to get caught up with, oh, it's Uncle Jimmy. He would never do that. I've known Uncle Jimmy. He's my brother. Mm-hmm. You need to take a long, hard look at those relationships.
You said something earlier, too. It's the relationship as far as you were a coach before. Mm-hmm. And you would make sure that you wouldn't have certain people in the car or anybody underaged in the car. If y'all were driving to practice or driving to a game or taking somebody home or going to get pizza, you made sure you drove alone.
Absolutely.
And that's something that parents need to take into consideration, too, is this could be the coach. This could be the counselor. This could be.
It's almost, I don't want to almost always, it's vast majority, but these kids have relationships with the offender. A lot of the times there is some relationship that the parents are aware of. It just is.
Yeah.
And so quit looking for the monsters in Target and Walmart. You need to step back and look for potential monsters that are your family members or your neighbors. And that's scary, and that's hard to do for people. And a lot of people don't want to accept that, like, oh, you're overreacting. I wish I had the statistics of the number of kids who are sexually assaulted in this county a year. Thousands just in this county, in Fort Bend County alone, I would venture to say.
Yeah.
And what % of those is it from somebody that's close to them or related to them?
95%, 90%.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't look, if some kid gets kidnapped and sexually assaulted, it's a lead story on the 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 10 o'clock news.
Right.
When was the last time you saw a kid about getting kidnapped? Yeah. And being sexually assaulted. Yeah, it happens. Absolutely. But it's always like, oh, yeah, the kid was kidnapped, but it's by the neighbor that they've been hanging out with for the last 6 months.
Right.
It's very rarely a stranger who takes the child.
Well, and you hear about these, when you're talking about taking to baseball games or taking them and do certain things, you hear about, or I've heard about whenever I was in school, you hear about these, they view this as a relationship. Like they view this as a kind of, majority of these people that are doing this, they view this as a kind of quote unquote, I guess, for lack of a better word, dating relationship, and they're kind of, like you said, that word grooming. They're kind of grooming this that you think for the three of us, we just can't imagine, think it's weird, but for these people that do this, that's how they act. That's how they perform these kind of, like I said, relationships. And that's what it is.
And they'll tell these kids, a lot of times we'll see them telling these kids, look, what we're doing, we can't tell anybody because we're going to both get in trouble. Not I'm going to get in trouble. We're going to get in trouble and we're not going to be able to see each other anymore. What if this child's like, I love Uncle Jimmy. I don't want to not see him. I can't say anything. They'll take Uncle Jimmy away.
Right.
Not comprehending that, wait a minute, he's doing something very vile to me.
Right.
I need to tell, but I can't tell. They're going to take Uncle Jimmy, and I'm going to get in trouble for not telling when it first happened. And those offenders will prey upon that day in and day out, and making that child believe that you're going to get in trouble because you didn't tell from day one, and you've been participating in this, and you've been willingly participating in this. Even though you're 7, just know we're going to get in big trouble. You too. So we can't talk about this. It's going to be our little secret, okay?
Right. When sex offenders get in trouble, are they able to get this expunged off their record?
No. If they plea. No, if it's a dismissal or not guilty, then a lot of times they can. But if they plead to it, it's never coming off the record.
The laws that they have currently on the books in relation to these kind of cases, do you see any changes in those laws, like as far as becoming a lot more harsh, a lot more strict? Are they the same way they've been for 10, 15, 20 years? Like, kind of what's because I just feel like this is becoming such an important issue that these laws are getting to the point where these people that are doing this, they're getting harsh penalties.
And I mean, first and foremost, there's not anybody out there lobbying for sex offenders that they should be treated more fairly if you're guilty of being a sex offender. So you see those laws swaying on the side of protecting victims. And in the last few years, continuous sexual assault of a child's been passed, meaning if you touch a child or more than one child, it can be the same child or more than one child, more than once in a 30-day period. So say you sexually assault your cousin twice in a 30-day period, that's continuous sexual assault of a child. That's now minimum 25 to life. Wow. That didn't used to be on the books, and that's been in the last few years. And then in the last, say, 18 months, they're now allowing if a sex offender has a prior conviction or prior probation for sexual assault of a child, it used to be that would never come in the guilt-innocence phase because they don't want the jury convicting you of your past behavior. They want to convict you and prove the case at hand. Right. Now the legislature has said that is admissible in the guilt-innocence phase. So you have a client who was placed on probation 25 years ago for sexual assault of a child. He's now been charged again. That prior 25 years ago, the jury's going to know about on the guilt-innocence phase that he has a prior sexual assault of a child.
So even if a defense attorney was lobbying or making a claim that should not be brought up at trial, they'd have no choice to object to that.
Right. You can ask the judge to keep it out, but I'm not sure you're going to find one that's going to typically do that.
Right.
Keep that information from a jury. So they allow it. I mean, we've had several cases like that, and the judge has allowed that information, and ultimately the client gets convicted.
What can a child do if they feel like they're being sexually abused or they're not quite sure, but they want to do something about it? What can a child do?
Statistically speaking, we see children tell their best friend's mom or a teacher or counselor at school. For some reason, that's how they typically outcry. They feel safe in those environments. So I would encourage your child to have a good dialogue with your teacher or counselor at school, professional good dialogue. And again, try to have your daughter's best friend's mom have a good dialogue, professional, reasonable dialogue with your child, because those are the outlets. And it's so hard for kids to say those things and see the storm that it creates around them, especially when it's involved with family. It tears families apart left and right, and kids have a very difficult time outcrying and making the allegations and finally coming forward and seeing the ramifications of that outcry, because then they carry a lot of guilt. So we see, so many children, when they first outcry, they need to immediately be put into counseling to try to deal with those issues that they're seeing that they carry guilt about, which is, as we look from the outside, we're like, that's absurd. But from the eyes of a 7-year-old, what she just said has ripped Uncle Jimmy out of their family, and mom is really upset with dad because of Uncle Jimmy, and now the cousins can't come over, who are Uncle Jimmy's kids, can't come over and play anymore. Yeah. And now her life has been flipped upside down. Yeah. And so, again, the sex offenders will prey upon that. It's like, if you tell you're not going to see your cousins anymore, do you not want to see your cousins ever again? You know how hard that's going to be? And just preys upon the sensitivities of those children. It's just horrific.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it's even, like, I just feel not strange, but I just feel cautious in talking about the subject, just because of,
I don't like it at all.
Just because of the sensitivity of it, and just because. But again, I think, and Johnny talked about it when we first started this conversation, is I think that's one of the ways how these things happen is because nobody wants to talk about it. Mm-hmm. It's a taboo subject that kids are afraid to bring up or talk about, or a parent is afraid to talk to their kid and say, hey, this is an uncomfortable conversation to have, but be on the lookout for this. And adults speaking to another adult, and they see something that's weird, about that person, but they're like, man, this is a weird conversation. I don't want to have this conversation. And so as strange and difficult as it is, I do think it's a conversation that's necessary, because that's how these kinds of things, that's how those guys win, because of the uncomfortableness of the conversation.
Absolutely.
And like, don't tell anybody, and nobody wants to talk about it, but you have this feeling or thought that that guy might be that guy, but you don't want to, you know what I mean? So
if this discussion helps one person look a little bit harder,
sure,
or a little bit further, then it's worth it.
Sure.
It's worth the uncomfortableness,
sure,
to make that happen. It's when it's sex trafficking, just hearing that word, I'm thinking of the movie Taken, where they're snatching kids off the street or from airports or pulling up in a van. I've never really, thought to look at the neighbor, or, your best friend's parents, or their neighbor, or the older brother. I don't tend to think of that. Most people don't. So I think, and I really appreciate you coming in with all that information, because it brings so much value and opens everybody's eyes to take these things into consideration, or at least be more observant.
And you have to start young. I mean, when my daughter was young, we started having conversations that no one's allowed to touch you here. If somebody does touch you here, you need to tell us about it. And then being able to have a dialogue. It's very difficult if you ask a child, hey, did somebody penetrate you or somebody touch you?
Yeah.
And the child's like, no, God, no. The child's not going to tell, even if it's happening. It's so aggressive and so just sounds so harsh that you need to find a way to make her better understand that does someone make you feel uncomfortable? Does Uncle Jimmy make you feel uncomfortable? Tell me about that. Why does he make you feel uncomfortable? What has he done? Is there anything that, you wish that Uncle Jimmy knew that you don't like? Uncomfortable is a very good start, rather than as somebody touching you.
Yeah.
Because that's hard but uncomfortable, you may start with, Uncle Jimmy tickles me. If you hear something tickles and wrestles with me a lot, as a parent, your spidey senses need to be exploding. And then that can lead into, well, how does he tickle you? Where does he tickle you? How does he say anything to you when he's tickling you? You got to go down that road with this child who, if you do it correctly, I think you can ultimately get there.
I think that's a good question, I think, when it comes to that. For parents that are listening, if their kid gives them information that they feel like or interpret as potential problem, what is the parent's next step? What should they do at that point?
So you have typically an outcry that to school teacher, best friend's mom, that there's some allegation, Uncle Jimmy touched me.
Yeah, let's say any adult that has a child that has said that to them, not necessarily a parent.
Immediately call law enforcement. If you're in the city limits, if you're in Sugar Land, call Sugar Land Police Department.
Okay.
They have a specialized unit. If you live outside the city limits, you call the Sheriff's Department. They then will take the child to the Child Advocacy Center, what they call the CAC, which has trained forensic interviewers who will put the child in a room, videotape, audio tape, and will question the child about these allegations in a way that is not leading, and that they're trained to gain the trust of the child so the child feels comfortable telling them about what happened.
Okay.
They'll be interviewed at the CAC. If the child makes accusations at the CAC, they then will further investigate and either submit to the DA's office, get a warrant, depending on the facts of the case. So vast majority, if there's an allegation, they're going to the Child Advocacy Center in Fort Bend County or Harris County.
Okay.
There's specially trained interviewers there, and it's a fabulous organization. They do very good work. And then they have follow-up counselors that you can go to counseling at these facilities and the CAC that'll provide the counseling that we talked about earlier for kids. So it's a process that the vast majority, if not every single agency, goes through, that law enforcement doesn't question the child. They're taken to a professional forensic interviewer who will videotape the interview, because you don't want this child telling this story 5 times.
Right.
You just don't. It's traumatic for the child. It makes the child feel bad. If the parents are questioning the child, did the parents lead her? Did the parents ask leading questions?
Right.
Well, tell me where Uncle Jimmy touched you.
Right.
Instead of, did somebody do something to you to make you feel uncomfortable?
Right.
You're already presuming that Uncle Jimmy touched you. You're already telling the child, Uncle Jimmy touched you. Tell me where.
Right.
So they want to stay away from those leading questions, because in the end, that you want to build a good case. And if you have people question them from the front end that may or may not be asking leading questions, that may or may not be recorded, that gives us as defense attorneys a potential cross-examination issue if the case were to go to trial. So
Right.
law enforcement avoids that, and rightfully so. Let's
Right.
not have anybody talk to this child about what her allegations are, except on videotape, that everybody knows what was said and knows it's not a leading question, and this child is questioned appropriately.
I know this may be a weird question, but do they dial 911, or is there a certain number that they call? I mean, how do they?
You can do either. I mean,
Okay.
if my child made an allegation, I would dial 911.
Okay.
That's me. But some people, it may be Uncle Jimmy who lives in New York and he was just down here staying for a month.
I'm with
and
you.
he's back in New York. Then maybe that's a non-emergency next day. But if it's a neighbor, if it's a coach, if it's someone living in the house, stepdad, it's a 911 call.
Okay.
We need to get out because that person needs to make sure this child is protected.
Okay.
As a criminal attorney, if you catch Uncle Jimmy as a parent and you stab Uncle Jimmy in the neck, how's that going to unfold?
Well, I mean, depends on your perspective.
Sorry for taking it in a different direction.
Well,
but,
no, I think that's a good question to ask because
I'm not liking Uncle Jimmy right now. I'm about to stab someone.
well, that's what I mean, because I sit here and think about that. I've seen stories of that where
I would hurt I would hurt, kill. It would be ugly. And if you catch somebody in the act as a parent,
If you catch somebody in the act, I believe it is open market on the offender. That's my opinion. I will defend that till the day I die. If it's after the fact, Uncle Jimmy touched me yesterday, and you go stab Uncle Jimmy in the neck, step back and look at the big picture. Your child, number one, is going to be traumatized by the allegations, having to go through the interview, law enforcement being around, her family being torn apart, and now her daddy's taken away,
yeah.
who she needs more than anybody at this time because daddy had a problem controlling, rightfully so, his emotions. But in the end, your daughter's going to suffer for that. Even if you get away with it, daddy may go away for a month or 2 months or a year.
Yeah.
So, in
That's
the
a-
act, I mean,
That's I mean, man, that's tough.
it's
It
so
could-
difficult.
you-
I don't know what I would do.
Well,
Frankly.
that's what I'm
I want to
saying.
say I would do the right thing
That-
and
that-
call law enforcement and not. But
That's the thing about that. Like, if your kid comes to you and says, yesterday so-and-so did this, and it's like egregious and just beyond the pale, like, as a father, I just don't know. I mean, to be like, you know what? I'm going to call 911 now.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just not, I mean, I
don't play that shit.
yeah, I mean,
It's hard, man.
And that just goes along with this conversation that, it's just, there's so many,
But I mean,
so
as
many
parents,
things.
that's something that comes with the territory and something that most parents are willing to do.
right. Yeah, it's a difficult deal, but like I said, I think it's important to have the conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I wanted to ask you if anybody has any questions related to this on either side of the fence. Is your door open? Is your phone open? If anybody has any questions related to this, or their kids
absolutely.
or-
I will. I'm a father first and foremost, and I will help. I will answer questions. If you need to know who to talk to, I will send you to the right people. I'll send you to the Crimes Against Children Division and DA's office if necessary. They're all great people over there. They run a really good program, prosecutor's office, and it's, they really fight for the kids, and that's, what we want in our communities. We want to rid our community of sex offenders, and, all of us being on the same page is very important. And something I didn't touch upon, I want to touch on real quick, is do not discount juvenile offenders. These 15, 16-year-olds hanging out with your 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old. We see a lot of that. People think of sex offenders as, dirty old men.
Right.
We see a lot of the juvenile offenders touching their younger cousins, younger stepsisters. So just because the kid is 15 or 16-year-old, do not give them the benefit of the doubt if something is not sitting well with you in your gut.
What happens in a case like that to that 15, 16-year-old? What is that?
So the juvenile system is set up for rehabilitation. So it is typically a probation with some very intense sex offender therapy. So there's counselors throughout Texas who are licensed sex offender service providers, and they specifically focus on juvenile sex offenders. And the juvenile sex offenders have to work this, what we call work the program, go through the program and attempt to be rehabilitated, in hopes that they are, because that, that's the goal, is we don't want them back.
Right.
And so that at this point seems to be the most effective way to prevent that from happening, because it's if it's really egregious, they can certify them as an adult, and you could lock them up for the rest of their life. But some of them are 13, 12, 14 years old, and the code just doesn't allow you to lock away these kids for the rest of their life. So you've got to find an alternative, and that is a extremely intense sex offender therapy session.
Well, not only that, but I'm sure the possibility of the fact that why would a 13-year-old kid know to do that unless somebody potentially had been doing that to them? So then you get into this line of, you find out more information.
It's much more prevalent than you want to believe.
Right.
It's a circle that when you see a 12 or 13-year-old doing those things, you take a good hard look at his background.
Yes,
Sure.
And a lot of times that comes out in the sex offender counseling.
yes,
And then you have who was it? Elizabeth Smart, who was kidnapped and held in the tent and sexually assaulted for years.
yeah.
Would you take into consideration at 23 if she sexually assaulted another child? Would that be what's the first thing would come to mind?
Well, for sure, yeah.
It's like, oh man, that messed her up.
Right.
We have to take that into consideration.
Correct.
So you see that with juveniles and adults that it never presented to, but I wouldn't say have, but I've had more than a few conversations with my adult clients who say, yeah, I was sexually assaulted by my uncle when I was a kid. I never talked to him about it. I never reported it.
Right.
You always see it.
Right.
A lot of times you see it.
Well, I think that's an important part that you talk about the process if somebody feels like somebody's doing that. Because I also think some people may hesitate accusing because they're like, man, I don't want to get the police to go down there and arrest them and pull them out of their house and create this whole hubbub, and it not true. So it's good to know that there's a process that goes before that till it gets to that point.
Yes, that offender, alleged offender, will never know. You call law enforcement will take you to CAC, child interviews. Child says nothing happened. You're just kind of stuck. Maybe it didn't, maybe it did. You continue to have those conversations with your child. Maybe they'll outcry later because you have a lot of delayed outcries.
Right.
But the offender never knows unless you tell him. And so, I would say if your child outcries to somebody, you don't tell anybody but law enforcement.
Okay.
And let the child be interviewed, because God forbid nothing happens, but the whole neighborhood knows that you thought your child was touched by the neighbor, and it's not true.
Right.
And it's just a bad environment that you've created that it may be a false accusation, or it may be not true. When they were at the CAC, they said nothing happened, but there were suspicions.
Because then you start getting into the false accusation, and man, that's just you start having those kind of situations.
Right.
It's you want to be cautious, but that can also just go off the rails as well. So
I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show. And
Yeah.
it is a touchy subject.
It is.
But
It is tough.
It's definitely worth putting out there. And again, if this helps one family, one person, one little girl or boy,
yes,
it was worth its weight in gold.
There's a lot of resources out here, and especially in Fort Bend County. There's a lot of resources for victims of these offenses that are out there that people don't know about.
And we'll have your phone number and all your contact information on here as well if anybody needs to reach out and ask any questions.
Sounds good.
Anything you want to add at the end here?
No, that's it. I mean, just trust your gut. Something doesn't feel right, it's probably not. Investigate it. I mean, don't discount it. I hear that all the time. Parents are like, man, something wasn't right, but I didn't think he was capable of doing that.
Yeah.
Don't underestimate. You just don't know. You got to protect your child.
You do. Being a parent's scary.
It is. It's very scary.
It's scary. It is scary. But hey, that's why we've got these kinds of shows, so that people can have communication and talk and know that the steps that they can take. And I will say again, just to rehash, it is good to know there's a process. I think that process is big, because you feel more comfortable if you do feel a certain way or are comfortable about a situation. There's a process to go to until it gets to that.
It's a very supportive, comforting process. They have done a very good job in Fort Bend County in creating this process that makes this as bearable as possible.
Good. Criminal Law Show with Sean McDonald. Sean, we appreciate it, man.
No
As
problem.
always,
Thanks for having me.
Every time I leave, I know more than I did when I started. So
I enjoy it.
I appreciate it. Contact Sean and Phoebe and Amanda. If you got any problems or issues, let them know. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Cool.
Take care.